Lieutenant Sarah Reeves adjusted her uniform one last time before stepping onto the training grounds at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. The California sun beat down mercilessly, but she'd endured worse during her 3 tours in Afghanistan. As a combat medic with specialized training in tactical field medicine and hand-to-hand combat, Sarah had saved countless lives under fire and earned every decoration on her chest. Yet today, she felt the weight of scrutiny more heavily than any rucksack she'd ever carried. This joint training exercise brought together elite units from across the military spectrum, but the Navy SEALs commanded particular attention. Their reputation preceded them, as did the reputation of their leader, Commander Jackson. His combat record was impeccable, his tactical mind unmatched, but his views on women in combat rules were stuck firmly in the previous century. Sarah spotted him immediately among the gathering of operators, tall, powerfully built, with a faith weathered by sun and saltwater. Jackson stood at the center of a group of SEALs, gesturing emphatically as he spoke. His eyes briefly met hers across the yard, and his expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Lieutenant Reeves," called Colonel Mariel Tangle, approaching with a clipboard. "Glad you made it. Your demonstration on tactical field medicine under fire is scheduled for 1400 hours. "Thank you, ma'am," Sarah replied, standing a little straighter. Colonel Tangus Dahl was a legend, the first African-American woman to fly the U-2 spy plane, and her presence at this training exercise underscored its importance. "I should warn you," Tangus Dahl added, lowering her voice. "Commander Jackson has been vocal about the inclusion of certain demonstrations in this program." Sarah nodded, understanding the subtext. "I'm familiar with the opinions of the commander, ma'am." "Good. Then you won't be surprised." Tangus Dahl glanced toward Jackson. "Just remember why you're here. Your technique saved an entire squad in the Corangle Valley. That's what matters." As Colonel Tangus Dahl moved on to brief other participants, Sarah felt someone approached from behind. "So, you're the combat medic who thinks she can teach SEALs something about battlefield survival." Commander Jackson's voice carried just enough volume for nearby operators to hear. "Interesting choice for this program." Sarah turned, meeting his gaze directly. "Commander, I look forward to sharing techniques that have proven effective in multiple combat scenarios." Jackson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure your PowerPoint presentation will be fascinating, Lieutenant." "No PowerPoint, sir. Hands-on demonstration only." Something flickered across Jackson's face. Surprise, perhaps, or annoyance at being challenged. "We'll see how that goes. My men trained for real-world combat, not controlled environments." Before Sarah could respond, an announcement called all participants to the main briefing area. As she walked toward the assembly, she noticed the eyes following her. Some curious, some skeptical, some openly hostile. Among the 250 Special Forces operators gathered for this training were some of the most decorated warriors in American military history, including Lieutenant Audie Murphy's grandson and several other descendants of military legends. The weight of expectation pressed down on her shoulders. This wasn't just about proving Commander Jackson wrong. It was about ensuring that life-saving techniques reached the operators who needed them, regardless of who delivered the message. Sarah took her assigned seat, aware that in the coming days, the tension between her and Jackson would come to a head. She just didn't know how explosive that confrontation would be, or how it would change both their reputations. Forever. 3 days into the joint training exercise, the tension between Lieutenant Sarah Reeves and Commander Jackson had evolved from subtle undercurrents to visible friction. During morning briefings, Jackson consistently questioned Sarah's tactical assessments, often with thinly veiled comments about theoretical knowledge versus actual combat experience. Despite her decorated service record, the breaking point came during Sarah's demonstration on emergency field medicine under enemy fire. She had just finished showing how to establish an airway using minimal equipment when Jackson stood up from the back row. "Interesting technique, Lieutenant," he said, his voice carrying across the training hall where 250 Special Forces operators sat watching. "But in my experience, when bullets are flying and you've got hostiles closing in, there's no time for such delicate procedures." Sarah maintains her composure. "With respect, Commander, this technique saves 16 men in the Corangle Valley when our position was overrun. It takes less than 40 seconds when properly executed." 40 seconds is an eternity in combat, Jackson countered, walking toward the demonstration area. "And I find it hard to believe someone could maintain that level of precision under actual fire." Colonel Eileen Collins, seated in the front row, exchanged glances with Lieutenant Susan Anwies Protee, Major Hernandez. The room had grown uncomfortably quiet. Perhaps the lieutenant would care to demonstrate under more realistic conditions, Jackson suggested, a challenge evident in his tone. Theory is one thing, application is another. Sarah felt the eyes of every operator in the room. Among them were some of the most respected warriors in modern military history, including Colonel Anime Hayes' daughter, who had followed her mother's footsteps into military medicine. To back down now would undermine not just her own credibility but that of every woman who had fought for recognition in combat roles. I welcome the opportunity, Commander Sarah replied evenly. What followed was a modified training scenario. The lights were dimmed, simulation explosions thundered through speakers, and Jackson himself selected 6 SEALs to act as wounded, while others created chaotic conditions around Sarah as she worked. To everyone's surprise, perhaps even her own, Sarah performed flawlessly, completing complex procedures while maintaining situational awareness. When the exercise concluded, even Jackson seemed momentarily at a loss for words. But his silence didn't last. During the afternoon session on close-quarters combat techniques, Jackson reasserted himself, dismissing modern adaptations that Sarah and others had helped develop. Some skills can't be taught from a manual, he announced to the assembled operators. Real combat isn't clean or predictable. It's brutal, instinctive. Colonel Merrill Tangle, observing from the side, frowns as Jackson continued. Tomorrow's demonstration on hand-to-hand combat should be interesting, he said, looking directly at Sarah. I understand Lieutenant Reeds is scheduled to participate. Co-lead, corrected Colonel Tangle. Lieutenant Reeds will be co-leading the demonstration with Master Sergeant Phillips. Jackson's smile didn't reach his eyes. Even better, I look forward to seeing these innovative techniques in action. That evening, Sarah received a message that Master Sergeant Phillips had been called away on a family emergency. She would be conducting the demonstration alone, facing a room full of skeptical Special Forces operators with Commander Jackson undoubtedly planning to undermine her at every turn. As she prepared her equipment for the next day, Sarah caught her reflection in the window. Her grandfather had served alongside Lieutenant Audie Murphy and had taught her that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about facing fear and doing what needed to be done anyway. Tomorrow would test that courage in ways she hadn't anticipated when she arrived at Coronado. The stage was set for confrontation. Sarah just didn't know how literal that confrontation would become. The demonstration hall fell silent as Lieutenant Sarah Reeves took her position at the center of the training mat. 250 pairs of eyes tracked her movements. Some curious, some skeptical, many simply waiting for the inevitable clash they sensed coming. In the front row sat Colonel Eileen Collins and Colonel Mariel Tangisdal, their presence lending gravity to the proceedings. Near them, the grandson of Lieutenant Audie Murphy watched with particular interest, having spoken briefly with Sarah about her grandfather the previous evening. Today we'll be covering adaptive close-quarters combat techniques developed for medics and support personnel operating in confined spaces. Sarah began, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. These methods prioritize neutralizing threats while maintaining the ability to render aid immediately afterward. Commander Jackson stood at the edge of the mat, arms crossed. Theoretical scenarios are useful, he interjected, but perhaps we should demonstrate with a more realistic scenario. Colonel Tangisdal frowned. Commander, I'm simply suggesting we give the operators what they came for, Jackson continued smoothly. Lieutenant Reeves claims these techniques work against larger, stronger opponents. I volunteered to help demonstrate. A murmur ran through the assembled Special Forces operators. This wasn't part of the program, but no one moved to intervene. Sarah met Jackson's gaze, recognizing the trap, but seeing no way to decline without undermining everything she stood for. Very well, Commander, she said. We'll demonstrate defensive counters to common attack patterns. Jackson nodded, stepping onto the mat. Let's show them what happens in real combat, he said, his voice low enough that only Sarah could hear the edge in it. Without warning, he lunged forward with the training knife that had appeared in his hand, moving with the speed and precision that made him legendary among the SEALs. What happened next would be recounted in training facilities across all branches for years to come. Sarah's body reacted before her mind could process the attack. Muscle memory from countless hours of training taking over. She pivoted slightly, redirecting Jackson's momentum while simultaneously striking a precise point on his wrist. The knife clattered to the mat. As Jackson's balance shifted, Sarah executed a perfect counter that used his own forward motion against him. A heartbeat later, the commander of one of the most elite SEAL teams in the Navy lay unconscious on the training mat. The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah immediately knelt to check Jackson's vitals, her combat medic training taking precedence over everything else. He was already beginning to stir when Colonel Tangistal stood and began to applaud slowly and deliberately. One by one, others joined in until the hall resonated with the sound. 3 days later, as the joint exercise concluded, Commander Jackson approached Sarah as she packed her gear. The bruise on his jaw had faded to a yellowish shadow, but the change in his demeanor was far more significant. "Lieutenant," he said, extending his hand. "I owe you an apology." Sarah accepted the handshake, noting the genuine respect in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Your techniques are sound, more than sound. I've asked Colonel Hayes to consider implementing them in our standard training protocols." Before Sarah could respond, Colonel Anime Hayes herself approached. "Lieutenant Reeves, a moment of your time. We're establishing a new cross-branch training initiative for combat medicine and tactical response. After what I witnessed this week, I believe you're exactly who we need to help lead it." As word of what had transpired spread throughout the military community, the incident became more than an anecdote about a SEAL commander underestimating a female officer. It became a turning point in how combat techniques were evaluated and implemented across branches, regardless of their origin. 6 months later, when Sarah returned to Coronado to lead the first official training session of the new program, she found Commander Jackson waiting to introduce her to his team. Among them stood several female operators, the first in his unit's history. "The battlefield doesn't care about gender," he told his assembled team as Sarah took her position at the front of the room. "It only cares about effectiveness. And that's something Lieutenant Reeves taught us all."